Just looking at you. Perfect. Thank you. Um, so just as always, I say thank you for introducing yourself. Keep chatting in there. This is your space as well as ours. We couldn't do any of this without you. Um, just a reminder that keeping yourself on mute if you can. As I say, dogs barking, I love, but it's not for everyone. And just want to remind us all that we come from all sorts of parties and perspectives, but the one thing that unites us all on this call is our desire to see the voting system changed in the UK and for the House of Commons. So, definitely chat, but let's keep it friendly. And if your comment gets deleted, it wasn't a friendly one, but I'm sure that won't happen because you're a lovely bunch today. So, why are we here? As you'll see from the email, we think there's a really, really busy and important autumn coming up for all of us as campaigners on PR. And just before, like a couple of weeks ago, we saw Zach Polansky become the leader of the Green Party. Now he's a really strong advocate for PR, and you might have seen that he, has been retweeting us and he's been sending messages about PR. And he really spoke well on lots of his media performances recently about PR. So that's fantastic. We've got that advocate there. We're still sort of seeing your party, whatever it's going to be called, forming with Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana. And lots of you know Alberto. Alberto's working really hard to try and find out what their position might be on PR. But as they've decided to be very democratic about everything, there will, if you decide to be a member of your party or you are a member of your party, an opportunity to influence their positioning. So please do. And like last week, sort of blindsided us all, this major reshuffle. And I'm sure that you'll have questions about that later, and really welcome them. But it's really making us think about what that new cabinet looks like. We had a really good picture of the old cabinet, who are our supporters, who weren't. We're also now thinking about people who might have been kicked out of their ministries might be ripe for APPG membership. And we know that many of you have been the driving force behind your MP joining the APPG on fair elections. So there might be more we're going to ask you to push on. And even though we're still like tentative about this, we are seeing growing numbers of Tory grandees talking about the need for change. They're not wholeheartedly supporting proportional representation, but they are definitely thinking the system has gone a bit awry. We've also seen many of you are members of Compass. I know if you're from the progressive side, Compass have done a big launch about what PR means for fighting populism, and I'm sure that you'll want to read more about that. And the other big thing that's been happening, so there's a lot already, and we're only just in September, it's hardly autumn, is the Community Empowerment and English Devolution Bill. And thank you to every one of you that sent a letter to your MP. Every MP outside of Northern Ireland, and there is always a good reason for that, received a letter, and that was all because of you. So thank you so much. And we had 13 MPs from Green, Lib Dems, and Labour speak in favour of scrapping first past the post. And remember, that's the key thing at the moment. We're hammering first past the post. It's not fit for purpose. And so we think that that's like stood us in really good stead for the elections bill. Now, I know some of you want to know when's that happening, and the answer is we still don't know. You will be the first people to know when we know when second reading's happening. But the bill, for those of you who aren't quite caught up, has included provisions for votes at 16, and that is going to be contentious. It's not going to have an easy ride through the House of Commons or House of Lords. And improvements to voter registration. It's definitely not the automatic voter registration that many of us have been campaigning for years on. And of course, nothing on PR. But we think that there's a really good opportunity to talk to the government and decision makers about the fact that everything is so fragile out there. We saw really strange local election results. Obviously, we've had the most disproportionate, excuse me, election ever. So we think there's a good opportunity to talk about why we need to think more deeply as a society about electoral reform. And that's why I'm so excited that Joe's here, because he is going to talk you through why we, as MVM, but why he is driving forward the campaign for a national commission on electoral reform. So I'm going to hand over to Joe. If you're ready, Joe, take over.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. It's great to be here, and it's a really interesting time to have this discussion. I think there's a lot going on politically in electoral reform, which Emma's alluded to, and there's a lot going on besides politically at the moment, as I think we're all seeing. As Emma mentioned, I have two roles. I am the national coordinator of Labour for a New Democracy. This was actually a project which was sort of seeded within MVM when it started back in 2020, 2019, maybe. And basically over the last parliament led to the huge movement of the Labour movement on the issue of PR, the sort of shift in positions of trade unions, of local parties and members, and of annual conference. And in this parliament, it's kind of shifted focus quite a bit from that Labour movement position to really focusing on Parliament and organising amongst Labour MPs. And my colleague Alex Clark really leads on that for Labour for a New Democracy. The other hat is for FairVote, basically acting as an organiser for the Secretariat of the APPG for fair elections. These are really closely aligned roles, obviously, and they're also very closely aligned with MVM. There's unprecedented support amongst Labour MPs in Parliament. This is most pro-PR PLP, Parliamentary Labour Party, we've ever had. That's a large part of the unprecedented support in the APPG that we're seeing as well. This is the largest all-party group on any subject, which is new. This is really sort of breaking some new ground. The APPG works really, and Land, frankly, works really closely with MVM. On the organising sort of strategy planning side, I think Emma and Alberto probably sat through more planning and strategy meetings with us than they deserve, but really integral to sort of designing the approach to our strategy and implementing it. As well, actually, as being really key to sort of feeding into the process of coming up with a terms of reference for the Commission, which we'll be talking about today. But also the grassroots movement, which MVM makes up and which you're all part of, is really key to all of this. For example, around the devolution bill the other day, thousands of supporters wrote to their MPs asking them to show up and basically make a case against first past the post. There's things like the sort of building of organisation and pressure around particular MPs who we need to sort of shift off the fence and into being more supportive of electoral reform. That stuff's really important because there's kind of APPGs and there's APPGs, and many of them are big kind of jolly parliamentary clubs where MPs come together and they have a reception every now and then, and that's kind of it. We are conceived, the APPG for Fair Elections is conceived as a campaigning APPG, something that actually organises MPs in Parliament, but also something that can reach out and organise and sort of call upon the support of people outside of Parliament and people who are part of a grassroots movement. And those two things working together are just really crucial. I think it's quite exciting to have a APPG which has grown to these sorts of numbers, that is that kind of APPG and isn't just a sort of a talking shop or a very respectable but quite hands-off kind of society. I'm going to jump into the terms of reference document. I'll share my screen a bit, and I've got a couple of slides, and I'll talk you through the document itself. And yeah, we'll have plenty of time for questions. It shouldn't take too long. Okay, so I think I've covered this really. The APPG started, this Parliament, launched publicly in November. Actually, worth mentioning, it campaigns for proportional representation, but it also campaigns against dark money in politics and sort of tightening of political finance rules, and also against disinformation in election debates. As I said, it's the largest APPG. These numbers are actually a bit out of date following the reshuffle, because you can only have backbench MPs as members. But a majority of the APPG's membership are Labour, which is interesting and important in terms of showing breadth of support across Parliament, but also on the government benches. When the APPG launched when it publicly launched back in November, it published this report, which is on the website. It's quite a lengthy report that goes into all three of those areas, kind of does a bit of a landscape review of where we are on electoral reform and dark money and disinformation. For each of them, there's one recommendation per area. The recommendation when it comes to electoral reform is a national commission on electoral reform. You don't have to be able to read this, by the way, don't worry. This is literally all that the report said about a national commission, just these 3 short paragraphs giving a very sort of high level outline of what that kind of means. Over recent months, and particularly over the summer, we basically turned that brief couple of paragraphs into this. Please don't try and read it off the screen, but it's still short. This is an 8-page report in total. It's not huge amounts of detail, but if it's much more detailed than this, it's not going to be very useful to the sort of policymakers and politicians and the government who we hope to get reading it. So it gives a clear outline of the sort of thing we're talking about, but at still a reasonably high level. A few points before we look at the document itself. So terms of reference outlines one possible means, and we think a good means, by which you could have a commission on the electoral system. Not necessarily the only way you could do it, not necessarily the only good way you could do it. And, if the government was persuaded to set up a commission on the electoral system, it may not look exactly like this. We're sort of quite alive to that. It draws on the experience of other sort of UK and global reform and review processes, and sort of reviews of those review processes done by experts and think tanks and so on. It aims to balance sort of a slightly more innovative, bottom-up, citizen-led deliberative process with the kind of presumed preference that the government may have for a more traditional top-down approach. It tries to sort of square that circle. And the other point I'd really make up front, which I think is very important, is that this isn't a matter of kicking the can down the road or into the long grass or what have you. This is really about moving the campaign forward along a viable path to PR now. As I'll get into, it's strictly time limited. It would be designed to come back with a recommendation or set of recommendations like within a year, basically. And there's a really important political case for this being an ask of government, which is basically the government isn't ready to legislate to introduce a proportional voting system. It's that's what we're aiming for, all of us. It's not going to do that tomorrow. It's much more likely to set up a commission that will explore the subject and which leads to a firm recommendation for PR, which also then solves the sort of thorny questions about, well, what system are you talking about? How will it work? How is it implemented? All of that stuff. Even more importantly than the government's being minded, not to go straight to implementing PR, is the fact that all of that support across Parliament that I'm referring to, all of the MPs who are in favour, can push much harder for a review process like this than they can for actually implementing PR. Putting ourselves in a Labour MP's shoes, Labour doesn't have a manifesto commitment to getting rid of first past votes and introducing PR. And so as a Labour MP, being willing to actually pressure your own government to do that is just a very, very high bar. What I think we are strategically best doing is maximising our coalition so that all of the MPs who are in favour of PR can very reasonably call on the government to set up a commission which reports back quickly and then moves us towards implementing PR, including within this Parliament. That's something really MPs can get around. And if MPs aren't sort of pushing for the government to look at this, then you've got to sort of question whether they actually support it in the first place. It's a much easier ask to sort of coalesce that sort of support around than just scrap first past post, implement PR tomorrow. And that's sort of the rationale behind trying to make this a key ask in the elections bill debate that will come up shortly in the autumn or perhaps the spring. And putting the government under pressure to do something about this. Anyway, sorry, I got off on a bit of a tangent there, but I will skip now to the report itself. Can you see that? Great. So we start with acknowledgements of the quite a long list of experts and academics who we've consulted on this. And for each of these, we've sat down with them, talked through the proposal, got their feedback, sort of strengthened and tweaked the proposal in light of that. I don't want to imply that this is necessarily an endorsement of the proposal by all of these experts, but they have all fed into the process, and we've used their feedback to strengthen the terms of reference. And there's some really impressive ones on there. We've got a list of key sources we've referred to. It starts with a sort of political introduction from officers. By the way, this is in the chat. We'll make sure you have it. So don't feel you have to read this through as we go. I'll just give you a high level overview. The officer's introduction is worth a read. It's sort of quite, I think, sober, because this report is meant to be put in the hands of ministers and other MPs and hopefully persuade people from where they start. But it does quite firmly make the case, I think, for having this sort of commission. Our officers are listed below. Now, getting into the terms of reference themselves, it starts with a rationale which basically sets out, why we need a commission in fairly even-handed terms. I think the most important bit of the whole terms of reference is probably the purpose. Many past commissions and review processes have, I think, gone wrong from the start, basically, because the terms of reference themselves sometimes set out what a good voting system looks like. The Jenkins review in the 90s is an example of this. Much better to start from absolute first principles. So the first question that is in the essay question of the commission is, what are the criteria for a suitable voting system in modern Britain? And once those are established, then you ask, does first past the post meet these criteria? Are there other voting systems which might better do that? And on balance, an overall recommendation for which would be best. At the same time, the commission has the aim of supporting this national conversation about the electoral system, which is something the government says would need to happen in order to move towards changing the system. Also just identifying how best to communicate these ideas to the public and to promote recommendations. The structure of the commission is basically a three-part thing. We propose a panel of independent commissioners, which looks something like a sort of traditional commission, acts as a kind of executive of the whole commission process. Then we have a secretariat which supports the process. It's basically staffing it. An expert panel based quite closely on the expert panel used in the Welsh Senedd reform process, which was the expert panel element of it was very successful. And that provides sort of evidence and data and so on into the overall process, into the other elements within the commission. And then finally, what we call a voters forum. And this is a deliberative democratic body of perhaps 100 members of the public, randomly selected but weighted to represent the wider public, and facilitated, in the way that deliberative democratic discussions are. And that can really provide a sort of voters, public's, ordinary person's view on these things. And that's particularly valuable, we think, in terms of identifying kind of values that are underlying choices about voting systems, and evaluating trade-offs between different systems, those sort of value judgments. Now, the way we've tried to square the circle of having this slightly sort of more top-down-ish thing together with a really bottom-up deliberative process is basically by giving the independent panel of commissioners, a duty to ensure that the report's recommendations reflect the values, views, and preferences of citizens. And that's informed by experts and evidence from practitioners and so on, but it's informed by consulting the public, and it's additionally specifically informed by talking to this voters forum, which is deliberating and revealing considered views of the public. A word on consultation would presume a sort of very open, broad, hopefully genuine, deep consultation process. They can be a bit tick box sometimes in practice. One of the things we identified, particularly from the Institute for Government's work, is that it's really important that you have, in any sort of independent process, independent commission, you have like stakeholder liaison throughout, obviously while maintaining the independence of the process. But the idea is that by sort of liaising with the government and parliamentary stakeholders who ultimately are going to be decision makers, you can firstly understand what they are thinking about, what they're concerned about, so that can be considered, it may be accepted or it may be rejected as not being particularly important, but considered within the process and responded to. And so it sort of trails and builds a bit of, manages expectations a little bit about what is going to come out at the end, and that just really helps make sure recommendations go somewhere. Timeline is expected to be 12 months. When you look at the Jenkins Commission, that happened in less than 12 months. Same with the Welsh expert panel. Some process has gone a bit longer. The New Zealand Royal Commission was a lot less than 2 years, but over one. 12 months is doable, potentially stretching, but certainly doable. Word on transparency. A real presumption towards everything being published and everything being transparent, and that's kind of a safeguard against, when you have a panel of commissioners who are writing the report, and you have a voters forum who are feeding their values and views into it. It's really important that both the end report is published, but also what the voters forum submitted is published. So if you do get commissioners sort of, going off brief, then that's visible when there's sort of an audit trail on it. Hopefully keeps them accountable. And this is also where we talk about having a bit of a communication strategy, trying to make the commission part of a national conversation, and that involves, putting members of the commission, commissioners, experts, potentially even participants in voters forum out there to discuss this in the media, externally. And then finally, outputs and next steps. So there's a presumption that, well, firstly, we're suggesting, again, this follows some learnings from the Institute for Government and elsewhere. We're suggesting that you would publish an interim report with some of the findings, halfway through the process. We suggested you might want to look at the first two questions being published on their own before you move on to the left. So if we just have a look back, that is, what are the criteria of a good voting system, and does first past the post meet that? You could publish an interim report just setting out the Commission's finding on those. It's possible it will find first past the post does. I think that's unlikely, but the process might end there. But on the assumption that it doesn't find that, it sort of would really tee up the rest of the conversation. I think draw a lot of people into that national conversation that we're trying to facilitate. And then the final report, which will be laid before Parliament. Government would be expected to respond fully within 3 months. A nice little innovation, which some of our experts suggested, is that you can have a sort of power to reconvene the Commission after the government responds, so that if necessary, the Commission can respond to the government's response, and it is just a way of trying to ensure it can hold the government to account. The other thing that's really important to hold the government to account within this document is the action of Parliament, select committees, things like the APPG, but just as, if not more important, is the action of people outside of Parliament. And it will be, if this commission happens and it produces a set of recommendations, there'll be a whole new fight about implementing them. That will be down the road, and that will be something that we all have to take part in. On the final page, there's a bit of propaganda, so we can hand it out as a leaflet. Right, the Terms of Reference was published on the 1st of September, the day Parliament came back. It was sent out to most MPs in Parliament from the chair of the APPG, Alex Sousek. There's been some good press coverage, and we're basically setting about sharing this as widely as possible, socializing it amongst the public, amongst supporters of electoral reform, amongst Parliament, and getting it in the press so that it sort of builds up as a call to action. I will just post some of that coverage in the chat, which you can have a look at. The other thing is we're doing things like a drop-in session for MPs next week, events like this one, talking to supporters, so we can get all of you hopefully talking about it. And things like fringe events. There's a fringe event at Liberal Democrat conference, one at Labour conference that we're organising, where we'll be talking about this and trying to get it on the agenda. Yeah, and I think that's probably all for now, but I'm very happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks so much, Joe. That was really interesting and very detailed. And you'll not be surprised, we have got a lot of questions. And we're trying to get to everyone's questions. But can we just quickly give an explanation about APPGs just once more and how it might help us achieve reform? Because I think there was so much in that. So just a bit back to basics, a few people asked.
So, sorry, the question is about what is the role of APPG?
What is it?
What role can it
What
play?
is it? And why might it help?
Okay, so an APPG is an all-party parliamentary group, which is a formal grouping of MPs from different political parties. There's like many things in Parliament, there's incredibly sort of arcane rules about what can and can't constitute an APPG and how you have to register them and so on. For example, you have to have 4 officers at least, including one who is a member of the governing party, one who is a member of the opposition, the main opposition party, things of that nature. Now, they can be formed for almost any reason. There's a huge number which are dedicated to specific countries. There'll be an APPG for Cuba, there'll be one for Spain, there'll be one for Kyrgyzstan, and MPs with an interest or some connection to them will meet and host events, things like that. Then there's a whole load which are focused on subject areas. So, there's a huge one for beer, which brings together industry stakeholders with parliamentarians and, will promote beer and British brewing and things to people across Parliament. And yeah, as I tried to sort of draw out, there's definitely a place for those APPGs. This APPG is conceived slightly differently as a sort of campaigning unit, which we've worked really hard to maximize the size of it, just being quite sort of active in recruiting it so that we can go out and say to people, above all, like MPs who we want to join, this is a really big thing. And, if they are not particularly in favor of electoral reform, that will impress them. If they are sort of on the fence about electoral reform, that makes it much easier for them to join. And it just shows the breadth of support across Parliament. But really, it gives us a way of bringing together MPs and peers as well. We'll have sort of regular meetings in Parliament where we can sort of talk about what opportunities there will be coming up in Parliament to get electoral reform on the agenda, or to move forward, or to sort of raise it at key times. And And then we, as the Secretariat, can work to basically support and coordinate and provide everything that those MPs need to make the most of those opportunities.
Thanks, Joe. And as you mentioned, that peers are members and they can actually be lobbied as well. So Simon asked that, so thank you. A big question was about, you mentioned about the commissioners for the National Commission. And one, let me just see who was asking this. Sorry, Anne asked how these people would be selected. Great question, Anne.
So in the terms of reference, we've not given huge detail on that. Independent commissioners there's a lot of different kind of bog standard commissions going on at any particular time in government. There's at the moment there's a water commission, there's the Casey commission, things like that, and people get appointed to them generally who are considered sort of politically independent and perhaps have some relevant experience, although not always. In this case, we've suggested that the independent commissioners would be sort of appointed in consultation with the relevant select committees. So at the moment, it doesn't seem like this is going to change. Slightly oddly, democracy falls under the Communities, Local Government and Housing Ministry. So the select committee looking after that stuff, including democracy, is the Housing, Communities, Local Government one. So it could be that the government sort of comes up with a list of names who are considered independent. Maybe they're retired judges, maybe they're sort of university professors, maybe they're people who have worked in kind of highly trusted professions. Like, if you look at polling, the most trusted people tend to be things like teachers and doctors and nurses and so on. You could have people like that sort of put to the committee who would kind of scrutinize the appointment and then select them. But I think it's really important to say the commission's kind of, it's meant to be designed in a way that it shouldn't matter hugely almost who the people are. I mean, it's designed so that it would not be political stooges who are appointed because they have been long-standing donors or grandees of a political party. They should be beyond sort of that kind of crude political influence. And honestly, we kind of think when you have those first principle questions being asked and being informed by evidence and by the voting public, it's very, very difficult to come to the conclusion that first past the post works, and would hope that whoever ends up as the commissioners, it would end up pointing that way.
I mean, as you'll all see in the chat, but Joe, in case you haven't seen it, so Anne was saying the right people is key, and I agree with you, Anne. Retired judges aren't known for radical thinking, so there is going to be a challenge there. And hoping there's room for trade unionists is something Dave said, and I think sort of to follow on from that, because I know you'd be passionate about making sure people like that are represented. There is a really good question from Tim, and quite challenging, about would there be benefit in having a citizens' assembly as a first step? And he quite rightly identifies that it was used very effectively in Ireland many years ago when they were trying to examine the issue of abortion, which was very contentious there.
I mean, I think you would recognise some of the features of the citizen assembly, I would hope, in the voters forum section of this. When we're talking about a deliberative democratic body that's facilitated, that has a learning phase that's sort of informed by experts and then goes away and does its own thinking. That's something that bears quite a striking resemblance to a citizen assembly. I mean, there are some reasons, I think, why a citizen assembly per se makes things slightly less slightly harder to persuade government of. I know citizen assemblies have been used to great success in various contexts. Someone's just mentioned the ones in the Republic of Ireland in chat. There is a bit of an aversion in government and in some parts of the Labour movement, I think, towards citizen assembly because, I mean, in a sense, it's small c conservative thinking. In a sense, it's sort of the apprehension about handing the whole thing over to what is quite a radical process. This isn't the most radical government in the world, as you may have noticed. Um, but also there is, I think, a slightly better reason to sort of format it within the kind of commission we've outlined, rather than just having a standalone citizens assembly, which is that often the citizens assembly, when it's been used in the UK, has sort of been set up, gone away and done its work, made excellent recommendations, but then there's kind of nothing to move from those recommendations to implementation. Now, having a layer of commissioners in between your citizens assembly and government, in a sense, is, it feels like a pain, because it means you're having to sort of interpret these citizens' views, and it's sort of a layer maybe you feel you could do without. But on the other hand, having that sort of commission to take the findings of citizens' assembly, to sort of shape it into something which reflects their views and reflects the public's views, but into a format which the government can work with and could move to implement, and then having them as champions to advocate for it in Parliament and in the national conversation, I think actually gives it a sort of strength which you don't get from a citizens' assembly at all. It's a sort of there's a gap between recommendation and implementation, which I think that actually would help us meet. So I don't know if that satisfies our question asked.
I imagine it'll be an ongoing question and discussion, but I'm going to ask you one more question before I give you a pause, because I know you'll be looking at what's going on with the Deputy Labour contest. Lawrence had some direct feedback, which was they didn't really think that the second question should be referred to as, is first past the post fit for purpose, as it sounds like an attack. And even though it is, and whether it's better to say the current system isn't fit for purpose. Did you think about that when you were finessing and wordsmithing?
That's interesting, actually. We did have some discussions along those lines, and some of our experts who we spoke to, and I don't want to betray any confidences here, but I think it's fair to say that, we picked our experts based on their expertise, not on their support for PR. It's a sort of random sample as far as their positions on PR goes. We just went to sort of well-known constitutional experts. Overwhelmingly, they were I would say they were clearly in favour of change and moving towards a more proportional system. They're obviously limited in what they can say on that. They have to position themselves as impartial. And a fair bit of the feedback was suggesting, well, perhaps you could present it slightly more impartially. And we moved quite a long way from the original draft, which was really sort of, we need a commission in order to choose an alternative to first past the post, which we can then go and adopt, which, is obviously what all of us on this call think. There's definitely, in presenting it as something which the government can go away and do, and it's just much stronger to be able to present it very even-handedly, as this is genuinely a fair process. Like, it's treating things, from first principles, is treating the current system in the same way as other systems, and it will come to whatever conclusion people come to. That's a very long-winded way of saying, yes, I think we could have gone a bit further on that. We've drawn the line where we did, but
really helpful. So have a quick bit of water and then see if you can get us an update on the deputy leader, whilst I answer a couple of questions that were directed a bit more at MVM. So there was one about whether we work, from Anita, with the Electoral Reform Society, and absolutely we do. And today, indeed, I was on a call with Willie, who runs their campaigns there, and we talk a lot and we work a lot together. And part of the joy of this piece of work that we've been doing with the APPG is that lots of us do work together driving forward to achieve the same goal, but we all bring different strengths. And ERS have definitely got that intellectual, robust sort of and they've got heritage, which is so important, and they can talk to people in a different way from us, who are much more banner waving and getting to the nitty gritty of it. So we are working with them. So I'm not going to collapse Anthony and David's question, but David, rightly points out that Reform are in the Make Votes Matter Alliance and support PR. But is there any any sign of them abandoning that commitment? And I think it's really interesting, because one of the things that MVM is proudest of is that we work with anyone who supports PR. And we have been reassured a couple of times by the policy team at Reform that they are committed to it. But you probably, David, like me, saw the interview where Nigel Farage said, at some point, first past the post becomes your friend, and I think we're at that point. So we are continually probing and checking that they are committed, because if they're not committed, we will withdraw them from the alliance, because we're not here to have people's names. I always say bums on seats. We're not here to have that. We're here to have people passionate about the work that we're doing. And why it's not connected, but I want to sort of like move on to Anthony's question about whether PR will stop Reform, is that, I'm asked that a lot, as you can imagine. And, for me, PR is not about the political parties, it's about us, the voters. And I want, PR is about us having our say and our votes counting. But, if you're on this call and you are worried about Reform, it will, the thing, that's the thing, will stop them from becoming absolute, number 10 next time round. You look at all the polls, and the polls show, and there's something ridiculous like 120 polls in a row that Reform have been ahead of everyone else by quite a long margin. So if there was an election tomorrow based on polling, they would do what Labour just did. They will have a very big majority on a very small amount of the votes. And we all know that's not fair. So you could frame it as PR would stop Reform, but I'd prefer to frame it as that PR would help all of us have our votes count and mean something. And that's why it is like much more important, as far as I'm concerned, doing it that way. Joe's going to be delighted to know we've got a whole series of questions about systems, which we are going to come to in a second. But just to move, just another sort of link point to the Reform is about, would MVM be targeting the new Labour mainstream group? So if you were a little late to the call, you might have not missed me saying that Compass are doing a lot of work in this area, and we again work with Compass very closely on lots of things, and Compass are signed up to the Good Systems Agreement, which we will talk to in a minute, and we have been and will continue to talk to them about what their plans are for mainstream group. But you'll have seen that Neil, if you've listened to him on the radio or seen his coverage in The Guardian, is very clear that PR is central ask for that group. So of course we will be working with them, but sort of to reiterate the point, anyone who wants PR is our friend and is our ally, and that's our only judgment. So Joe, you're back. Hopefully you might have an answer or not, but Sean has asked whether any declared Labour deputy leadership candidates support PR and support the case for the National Commission, and what opportunities will there be to canvass their views during this very short election process. And I'm sorry for those of you who aren't Labour Party members, but I think for those of you who are on the call, this is an important little element. So Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've I have just been looking at the latest, because 7 o'clock is the moment when the party updates nominations from MPs for deputy leadership candidates. So they've come in while we've been on this call. And yeah, I mean, before we get into positions on PR, there's a few phases to the deputy leadership contest. This week, in an incredibly short space of time, candidates who must be MPs, Labour MPs, have to get 80 nominations from their fellow MPs in order to proceed to the next round. They need to get those by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Once they get to 80 MPs and pass that deadline, the next phase is from Monday next week, lasting for a few weeks, I think. And that's a phase in which they have to get nominations from local constituency Labour parties and from affiliates, trade unions and socialist societies. And there's a certain number of those they have to get in order to proceed as well. It's much easier to get those than it is to get the MP nominations, because the threshold is very high for that. And then, assuming you get your 80 MPs and you meet the threshold amongst a mix of local parties and affiliates, then it proceeds to the final stage, which is a one member, one vote vote amongst the membership and affiliate membership. It's done on AV if there are more than two candidates. So where we are now is we're in that phase of the finding nominations for candidates amongst MPs, and as of this evening, there are two candidates who look like they're sort of pretty certain to meet that threshold. Bridget Phillipson has already met that threshold. She's apparently on 116, and Lucy Powell is on 77, which is just a few short. The other candidates, Paula Barker, Belle Ribeiro Addy, and Emily Thornberry, are all in the sort of low teens still. So there's the question of whether they're going to meet 80 by tomorrow evening. So that's kind of the contours of it. So that raises the question of where do the two front runners stand? And I've actually I've got a video that I can play, which some of you might have seen, setting out fairly recent comment on this from Bridget Phillipson. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully the sound as well. Do wave if you can't hear the sound.
The truth is, yes, there are going to be a lot of winners with votes that are not particularly impressive in terms of the overall share of the vote.
Bridget? I'm inclined to agree with Sarah to an extent on this, in that a win's a win. And, we did secure a massive majority at the general election, and we fight on
35% of the vote, the lowest share of the vote of any government with a majority in British history.
I mean, we've got our system. We fought and won on that basis.
Your party conference voted against it in 2022.
Well, we don't have. We're not advocating for any change in the electoral system, but
I'm surprised.
Could you all hear that?
Yes.
Audio? Great, I couldn't, so
okay.
I was relying on you waving, and you didn't, so that's great. Yeah, I mean that's a fairly it's not the best answer from our point of view. Now,
so
Lucy,
Joe, so just quickly, we're going to have to start getting a bit more quick fire because we've got a lot of questions and 10 minutes left.
Okay, sorry. Lucy Powell has been much more positive. She's long supported PR, providing it keeps the constituency link. She, until recently, has been leader of the House of Commons, and before that, shadow leader of the House of Commons. Interestingly, even when she was shadow leader of the House of Commons, she did mention that she is personally supportive, and that was written up in the press like in 2022. Now, it wasn't a particularly strong intervention in favour, but lots of front bench MPs who are in favour don't say anything. So it's quite encouraging. We'll have to see whether she comes out more strongly in the leadership contest as it develops.
Thank you. So there are a lot of questions about systems, and as you know, you've said in the National Commission, part of that is to review systems, but quite a lot of people are interested in whether these systems work. So I'm just going to say there's a couple of documents to have a look at. We've put it in the link, the Good Systems Agreement. So this gives, to answer Anne's question, gives a flavour of what we believe a suitable voting system could be, because it's based on things like a constituency link and proper proportionality, and that's like laid out quite clearly for you. We don't have a preferred PR system, Keith, and we're really quite firm about that for lots of reasons, but we are about to launch a new report in about 2 weeks' time, which goes through the most common used systems in the UK and includes also AV Plus, which was the recommendation from the Jenkins Commission, the one that the Green Party support, the one that Nigel Farage has said that he would want to implement. And it goes through all these systems and marks them against the Good System Agreement. So do they give a constituency link? So you will all be given a copy of that, or if you want it, we can send you a copy of that. But it's definitely about talking about the key constituents, I should say, the key ingredients of a good system. I mean, I'm just going to see. So, and about Philip asked about whether we should be focusing on the case for PR as opposed to an optimal system, and I think that's what we've been doing and we continue to do, and we're trying to work very hard at sort of showing why first past the post does not work, whilst also behind the scenes thinking about what we would think is a good system. And that's why the Good Systems Agreement and Alberto's new report together really help. I think one question we have got, which has been a burgeoning question, because to answer someone else's question about, will this happen, is the Boundary Commission, because that actually does have an impact. So this report will have some of that. But and there was a question about DeHont voting systems, and I don't know, Joe, I don't know if you want to answer that, or if we just say it's in the report, have a look at the report.
Yeah, I think I'll probably leave it to the report.
There
I
we
mean,
are.
I think the Good Systems Agreement has been sort of really important in just identifying the kind of principles that a system needs to meet. There's a good discussion we had about, how we further sort of define and clarify that. I think where the Commission comes in is making a final sort of decision that the government can go and implement.
Yeah. So, Joe, some more quick fire. This one's easy, I hope. Meta asked, what is the date for the Labour Fringe event the Land is running?
It's on the, well, we got two actually. There's one on the Sunday of conference. I forget what date it is, but it's the Sunday of conference. And then one on the Monday of conference. The Sunday one is a rally where we'll have people like Andy Burnham and trade union general secretaries and MPs from across the House. And then the one on the Monday is focused more on the National Commission, a bit more of a sort of seminar.
And if you're at the Lib Dem conference, there's also a fringe about the National Commission and PR there where Joe is presenting. Philip has I think you're absolutely right, Philip. He asked, can we agree that the message that needs communicating to the wider public is that our cause is about fairness to voters? And you're so right. And I think that one of the things that's challenging is parties, all the political parties, look at it through the lens of what does it mean for us? Whereas what we want them to do is, what's it mean for those voters? What does it mean for our the people who are out there every day voting? And I think that, someone has said that they think it's Steve has said, how would a PR system allow for a citizen's access to an MP? Because the first past post system is inherently unfair, because it allows you to only communicate with one person who may not be approachable. And I think that's something that we talk about a lot. And, those of you who've heard me speak before know, I've lived in a safe seat all my life. And that means that a lot of the time I don't feel represented. So whatever system we do come up with, we really want to make sure that the voters are at the heart of those systems. Joe, I'm going to jump to Jonathan's question, which I think is really sort of like at the heart of lots of the things that we're thinking about is, can you sum up how this action will lead to getting PR for the House of Commons? And, can you sort of like envisage a roadmap? And maybe at this point, because someone earlier on, let me just ask, asked about the elections bill and what that opportunity gives us. And if there's time, we'll just jump on a couple of other little questions. But I think Jonathan's question is probably the one we all dream about every day.
Well, this is, in my view, this is the pathway that allows, that keeps the possibility of implementing PR within this parliamentary term. And to understand that, we have to look very, very briefly at the alternative. The alternative is we organise for a vote to implement PR as an amendment to the elections bill or some other opportunity soon. If we do that, as things stand, and things may change through the parliament, of course, but as things stand, we're not going to win that vote. By sort of forcing a vote on that, we end up probably putting lots of Labour MPs who support PR in a position where they're being whipped to vote against, and they have to either vote against and get in a lot of trouble, or they vote for, but like it's split and they lose. We don't want to do that. We want to keep making progress towards electoral reform. And by having a commission that reports very quickly, comes back with a system that could be implemented, then within the rest of the parliament, we have the opportunity to fight for that to be implemented. And if we succeed, we get PR. If we don't succeed, it puts us, just through going through that process, puts us in a much better position to try and get PR straight after the next general election.
Thank you, Joe. And because we are running out of time, we're not dodging questions. I've seen like people like Anthony's asked about, will we get into problems like France, and someone asked same about Germany. None of us in this virtual room are naive enough to think that any system fixes all of our problems, because that's just not what political systems do. And I think, Nina made the point about what's it mean for democracy, for our country and for the planet. I think that, every step that we can make to make our system fairer, hopefully will have a better impact on democracy. But, there isn't a perfect system, because I think if there was, everyone would have implemented it by now. Well, apart from authoritarian states. And Joe said, Joe Bangs has said, don't assume trade unions are equally clued up on voting reform. And we know this. And there's a great campaign called Politics for the Many, which is hosted by the ERS, who work very closely with unions. And we are going to be talking to all of you soon about how you can help us influence the National Education Union. So, get that ready. But I'd just like Joe, there's two more questions that I would like your perspective, and I've got a perspective too. So how high are your hopes that the next general election will not be based on first past the post? And what do you need from activists, Steph?
I don't want to seem like I'm dodging the question, but I genuinely have not found it in the past that helpful to sort of try and gauge how positive or otherwise I feel about the objective I'm campaigning for. In the last parliament, at various times, it felt like extremely implausible that we would get Labour conference to vote in favour of PR. And sometimes it felt like, it was quite doable. What you have to do is just keep putting the conditions in place that move you towards that goal. And I think that's what we got to do now. I mean, we could be a series of fortunate events away from PR happening very, very quickly. Or there may be some really big challenges along the way. We've just got to keep sort of taking sensible steps to make it more likely, whatever the sort of political developments.
And what can people do to support you, the cause, everyone?
What people can do to support is continue what you're doing in MVM and just acting as the grassroots movement pushing for PR. That's going to be so important as we get towards these sort of really, potentially some knife edge moments, and where we have to sort of grow that coalition across Parliament that I'm talking about, and making people feel, they have a mandate to go and argue for something that isn't necessarily what the people above them are campaigning for. And the best way to do that is to show that the people they actually are meant to serve, constituents and ordinary people, actually really care about this and understand how it's going to, improve politics and our society as a whole.
Thank you, Joe. And I know that some of you are going to have to leave. So I want to say thank you very much to Joe for the presentation. Really appreciate it, and for spending time with us. And I want to say to Janen, she's 83 and would like to see PR before she dies. Let's make that happen for you. I would like to just to finish off by saying, I have really high hopes for our campaign. I think we've got great coalitions. We've got some really good MPs who are pushing really hard, and we've got you. And, the one thing that you can do for us at the same time, every time, go out, have a conversation with someone who doesn't know about democracy, first past post, PR, and tell them about why it's so important to change our voting system, because together we can make this change happen. So thank you very much. If your question didn't get answered, drop a message to team@makevotesmatter.org.uk and we'll make sure it's answered. And we're going to get a couple more sessions in the diary soon. One for those of you who are interested in, the more progressive side of politics with Compass. And we're also going to be able to reveal a Conservative speaker for you very soon. So you'll be able to hear from their side and perspective about electoral reform. But go have a lovely dinner or whatever you do in the evening. And thank you so much for attending. We'll see you very soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Apologies for making you watch me eat my dinner at points. A very, very interesting meeting.
We love it. Don't worry.
Great sometime.
Exactly.
Campaigning somehow.
Exactly.
See you next time.
Bye.